The luxury car dealership gleamed under the bright showroom lights, polished floors reflecting the sleek curves of high-end vehicles. Salespeople in sharp suits moved confidently, chatting with well-dressed clients. Near the entrance, a woman in simple, modest clothing walked in, her eyes scanning the cars with quiet curiosity. She wasn't dressed like the usual clientele, no designer labels, no flashy jewelry. Just an ordinary person who seemed out of place among the luxury. One of the salesmen, a tall man with a slicked-back haircut and an air of arrogance, noticed her immediately. His lips curled into a faint smirk as he nudged his colleague. "Looks like someone got lost on their way to the used car lot," he muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. A few snickers followed. The woman either didn't hear or chose to ignore them, continuing to admire a sleek sports car. Another salesman, younger and less jaded, hesitated before approaching her. "Can I help you with anything?" he asked politely, though his tone suggested he didn't expect much. The woman smiled warmly. "Just looking, thank you." The first salesman, unable to resist, sauntered over. "You know, these cars aren't exactly budget-friendly," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere else?" The woman's smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes shifted, a quiet confidence. Before she could respond, the sound of a deep, powerful engine rumbled outside. All heads turned as a midnight black Rolls-Royce glided to a stop right in front of the showroom. The doors opened, and a sharply dressed chauffeur stepped out, followed by a well-built man in an impeccably tailored suit. He adjusted his cufflinks and walked straight toward the entrance. The atmosphere in the dealership changed instantly. This was a man who commanded attention. The arrogant salesman's smirk vanished. His colleague straightened his tie, suddenly nervous. The woman, however, remained calm, watching the scene unfold with an amused glint in her eye. The man in the suit entered, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on the woman. Without hesitation, he walked up to her and gave a slight bow. "Madam, the car is ready for your inspection." Silence fell over the showroom. The salesmen froze, their expressions a mix of shock and horror. The woman they had just mocked turned to the arrogant salesman, her smile never fading. "I think I'll take my business elsewhere," she said softly before walking out, the chauffeur holding the door open for her as she stepped into the Rolls-Royce. The last thing the stunned sales team saw was the black luxury car pulling away, leaving them in utter disbelief. The Rolls-Royce disappeared down the street, leaving the dealership in stunned silence. The arrogant salesman's face burned with embarrassment, his earlier smirk long gone. His colleagues exchanged glances, some amused, others shaking their heads at his mistake. The younger salesman, the one who had at least been polite, let out a low whistle. That did not just happen. The arrogant salesman clenched his jaw. "She was just messing with us. Probably rented that car for an hour to show off." But even as he said it, his voice lacked conviction. There had been something about the woman, the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence, that didn't match the rented glamour theory. Meanwhile, inside the Rolls-Royce, the woman leaned back in the plush leather seat, finally allowing herself a small laugh. The man in the suit, her personal assistant, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Should I call ahead to the next dealership, or would you prefer to visit unannounced again?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. She shook her head. "No, let's go straight to the office. I think we've made our point." Back at the dealership, the manager, who had missed the entire scene, stepped out of his office. He took one look at his frozen sales team and frowned. "What's going on? Why does it look like someone just saw a ghost?" The younger salesman cleared his throat. We might have just lost a big client." The manager's eyes narrowed. "Explain. Now." As the story spilled out, the manager's face darkened. He turned to the arrogant salesman, who was now shifting uncomfortably under his boss's glare. "You insulted a customer?" "In my showroom," the manager hissed. Do you have any idea who that woman was? The salesman swallowed hard. No. The manager pinched the bridge of his nose, as if fighting off a headache. That was the owner of Luxury Auto Group. She owns half the dealerships in this city, including this one. The color drained from the salesman's face. His stomach dropped like a stone. The manager didn't raise his voice, but his next words were ice cold. Clean out your desk. You're done. As the salesman stood there, reality sinking in, the younger salesman couldn't help but think about how quickly things had changed. One moment, they were laughing at an ordinary woman. The next, careers were ending. Outside, the sun shone just as brightly as before. But inside that dealership, nothing would ever be the same. The dismissed salesman stormed out of the dealership, his ego bruised and his future uncertain. Meanwhile, the woman in the Rolls-Royce gazed out the window, lost in thought. The city blurred past her, but her mind was years away, back to a time when luxury cars and private chauffeurs were nothing but distant dreams. She hadn't always been the owner of a multi-million-dollar auto empire. 20 years ago, she was just a young girl from a small town, working 2 jobs to help her family make ends meet. Her father had been a mechanic, fixing old cars in a rundown garage. She grew up surrounded by grease-stained hands and the smell of engine oil, learning the value of hard work before she even hit her teens. One memory stood out, the day a wealthy businessman pulled up in a shiny Mercedes, sneering at her father's modest shop. "You'll never be more than a roadside mechanic," he had said before driving off. That moment stuck with her. She promised herself that one day, she'd prove people like him wrong. Fast forward a decade. She had saved every penny, worked brutal hours, and even slept in her car at times while building her first used car lot. People doubted her. The auto business is a man's world, they said, but she refused to back down. Slowly, her reputation grew. She treated customers with respect, whether they were buying a 1000 J U N K E R O R A 1000 Junk Aurora 100,000 luxury sedan. And now? She owned dealerships across the country. But she never forgot where she came from. That's why she still visited her own showrooms in plain clothes, watching how her employees treated customers when they thought no one important was looking. Back at the dealership, the manager was on the phone, his voice tense. "Yes, ma'am. It's been handled. Of course. We'll ensure it never happens again." He hung up and exhaled sharply. The remaining sales team stood frozen, waiting for the fallout. "From now on," the manager said, his voice firm, "every customer walks through that door gets treated like they could buy the whole damn showroom. No exceptions." The younger salesman nodded, his mind racing. He had seen the woman's calm demeanor, the quiet power in her presence. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made a scene. Yet with one phone call, she had changed everything. That night, as he locked up the dealership, he made a decision. He wasn't going to be like the arrogant salesman who got fired. He was going to learn, to work his way up, the right way. Little did he know, his chance was coming sooner than he thought. The fired salesman sat at a dimly lit bar, swirling his drink as humiliation burned through him. He'd already called 3 other dealerships about jobs, word traveled fast in the auto industry, and nobody wanted the guy who'd insulted the boss. His phone buzzed with a text from his landlord, rent was due. The ice in his glass clinked as his hand shook. Meanwhile, the younger salesman walked home, replaying the day's events in his mind. He stopped outside his modest apartment building, noticing a sleek black car parked across the street. His breath caught when he recognized the Rolls-Royce from earlier. The window rolled down, and the woman's face appeared. "Get in," she said simply. Heart pounding, he approached the car. The chauffeur opened the door, and he slid into leather seats that probably cost more than his yearly salary. The interior smelled like rich mahogany and money. "You showed basic human decency today," the woman said, studying him. "That's rarer than you'd think in this business." He swallowed hard. "I just treated her like a person." "Exactly." She handed him a business card with just a phone number. "Call this tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't be late." Before he could respond, the chauffeur opened his door again. The meeting was over. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away, he stood frozen on the sidewalk, the card burning in his hand. The next morning, the fired salesman woke to pounding on his door. Two men in suits stood outside. "We're here to collect your company car and phone," one said. His final connection to the luxury world was being severed. At exactly 9 a.m., the younger salesman made the call. A deep voice answered, "Report to the executive offices at 200 Grand Avenue. 10th floor." When the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a glass-walled office with panoramic city views. The woman sat behind a massive desk, reviewing documents. Without looking up, she said, "You'll start as assistant manager at our flagship location. Prove yourself there, and we'll talk about your future." His mouth went dry. This was a 5-year career jump at minimum. "Why me?" he blurted out. Finally, she looked up. "Because the best salespeople understand that everyone deserves respect, whether they're buying a Honda or a Hennessy." She slid a folder across the desk. "Your first task. Fire anyone on this list who treats customers like yesterday's trash." The list had 7 names. He recognized the arrogant salesman at the top. The fired salesman sat in his nearly empty apartment, staring at the eviction notice taped to his door. His savings were gone, his reputation in tatters. The bottle of cheap whiskey on the table was half empty, just like his prospects. His phone buzzed, another rejection email for a job application. Then a news alert popped up: local auto mogul expands empire with new luxury dealership. The article featured a photo of the woman who'd humiliated him, standing proudly beside her latest acquisition. His blood boiled. "Think you're so special," he muttered, crushing the empty beer can in his fist. Across town, the newly promoted assistant manager walked through his first day at the flagship dealership. The staff eyed him warily. They'd all heard what happened to the last guy who crossed the boss. He kept his head down, studying the employee files he'd been given. Each name on the termination list came with detailed notes: customer complaints ignored, shady sales tactics, outright disrespect. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number: "You don't belong in that office. Watch your back." That night, the fired salesman drove past the woman's mansion in a borrowed pickup truck. His hands shook on the wheel. He wasn't sure what he planned to do: maybe key her car, slash some tires. Something to make her feel a fraction of the humiliation he felt. As he crept toward the garage, motion lights flooded the driveway. He froze. A deep voice came from the shadows: "I'd stop right there if I were you." A security guard stepped into view, hand resting on his holstered taser. Behind him stood 2 more guards. The woman's personal assistant emerged from the house, phone in hand. "We've been expecting you," the assistant said calmly. "The police are on their way." The salesman's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the pavement, his revenge fantasy evaporating. I just wanted to hurt her." The assistant shook his head. "She gave you a job when nobody else would. Paid you triple what other dealerships offered. And this is how you repay her?" The next morning, the assistant manager arrived at work to find the woman waiting in his office. "One of your termination targets saved us some trouble," she said, sliding a newspaper across the desk. The headline read, "Disgruntled former employee arrested for attempted vandalism." Below it was a mugshot of the arrogant salesman, his eyes red and swollen. "Here's what's going to happen," the woman continued. We're pressing charges. But we're also paying for his rehab. The assistant manager blinked. After what he tried to do? She leaned forward. Second chances built my empire. He'll get one, far away from here. And you? She stood up. You're getting promoted again. Effective immediately. As she walked out, the assistant manager stared at the newspaper. He'd just learned the most valuable lesson of his career: true power wasn't in crushing your enemies, it was in deciding not to. The assistant manager sat frozen in his new office, the newspaper still in his hands. Rehab? Second chances? None of this matched the ruthless businesswoman the industry feared. His phone buzzed, a calendar reminder for his 10 a.m. meeting with the company CFO. He arrived at the executive conference room to find an unexpected scene. The woman was arguing quietly with her assistant, her usually composed face tight with emotion. Not another dime until the audit is complete, she hissed. The moment they noticed him, the conversation stopped dead. Perfect timing, the woman said, her mask of calm slipping back into place. You're about to learn why we really gave that fool a second chance. The CFO, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, slid a folder across the table. Inside were legal documents and news clippings about a decade-old scandal at a rival dealership group. Recognize anyone? The CFO asked, tapping a faded photo. The assistant manager's breath caught. There, younger but unmistakable, stood the arrogant salesman, testifying in court against his former employers for fraudulent sales practices. He was a whistleblower, the woman said quietly. Lost everything, his career, his marriage, nearly his life to drinking. Sound familiar? The assistant manager's hands trembled. But why hide this? It makes him look pathetic? The woman's laugh was bitter. The auto industry eats whistleblowers alive. We buried his past to give him a fresh start. And he repaid us by becoming exactly what he once exposed. A heavy silence fell. The CFO cleared his throat. There's more. Our legal team found discrepancies in 3 dealership financials, all run by managers on your termination list. Seems our fired friend wasn't the only one cutting corners. The woman stood abruptly. You wanted to know how I built this empire? By remembering every burned bridge, and making sure I wasn't the one holding the match. She nodded to her assistant. Show him the garage. The garage turned out to be a secure warehouse filled with vintage cars, and one ordinary sedan, its hood open to reveal a hidden compartment packed with documents. My father's car, the woman said, running a hand over the faded paint. He kept records of every shady deal his boss forced him to make. Died before he could use them. Her voice hardened. I won't make that mistake. The assistant manager finally understood. The terminations, the rehab payment, it wasn't mercy. It was strategy. Every fired employee knew secrets. Every second chance came with strings. His phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Ask her about the missing $2 million in Chicago. When he looked up, the woman was watching him closely. Problem? He swallowed hard, sliding his phone into his pocket. Just, adjusting to the view from the 10th floor. The assistant manager's fingers hovered over his phone screen, the mysterious text about Chicago burning in his mind. He glanced up to find the woman still studying him, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Something on your mind? She asked, her voice deceptively light as she closed the hood of her father's car with a soft thud. He hesitated. This was his moment, to prove his loyalty, or to question the empire he was now part of. Before he could decide, her assistant's phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the tension. The assistant paled as he listened. Ma'am, we have a problem at the Chicago location. The woman's posture went rigid. What kind of problem? Police. They're executing a search warrant. 3 hours later, They stood in the Chicago dealership's back office as officers carted away boxes of files. The woman watched stone-faced, but her assistant manager noticed the slight tremble in her clenched fists. A detective approached, flipping open a notepad. "Ma'am, we're investigating allegations of financial fraud. Specifically, $2 million in missing inventory funds." The assistant manager's breath caught. Exactly what the text had mentioned. The woman didn't flinch. "You'll find all our records in order, detective. Then you won't mind if we take these?" The detective held up a ledger marked Chicago Special Orders. Something flickered in the woman's eyes, just for a second. "Of course not." As the police left, the assistant manager finally worked up the courage. "Who would send me a text about the missing money before this happened?" The woman turned slowly. "What text?" He showed her the message. Her face darkened. "There's someone you need to meet." They drove to a nondescript office building downtown. The elevator descended to the basement, where an elderly man sat surrounded by monitors, each displaying different dealership security feeds. "Meet our silent partner," the woman said. "The man who funded my first dealership." The old man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "And the one who's been sending you texts, kid." The assistant manager gaped. "Why?" "Because she," the man pointed at the woman, "was about to take the fall for Chicago." "But the stolen money?" "It wasn't her." He tapped a keyboard, pulling up surveillance footage. The screen showed the terminated arrogant salesman, meeting with the Chicago manager in a parking garage, exchanging envelopes. "The whistleblower became the thief," the old man said. "He's been planting evidence across the company for months." The woman sank into a chair, her composure cracking for the first time. "I gave him a fresh start. And he used it to destroy you," the old man finished. "But we've got him now." He played another clip, the salesman bragging to someone off camera, "By the time they figure it out, she'll be in handcuffs." The assistant manager's mind raced. What now? The woman stood, her usual steel returning. "Now we set a trap." Rain sheeted against the dealership windows as the woman's black Rolls-Royce pulled in after hours. The assistant manager watched from the showroom, nerves taut. The trap was set, fake documents planted, security feeds looped, police waiting nearby. The back door creaked open. Right on schedule, the arrogant salesman slipped inside, flashlight sweeping across offices. He went straight to the manager's desk, picking the lock with practiced ease. "Looking for something?" Lights blazed on. The woman stood framed in the doorway, flanked by detectives. The salesman whirled, panic flashing across his face before hardening into defiance. "You ruined my life," he spat. "No," the woman said calmly. "You did that when you started stealing." She stepped closer. "I gave you a job when no one else would. Paid for your rehab. And this is how you repay me?" The salesman laughed bitterly. "You think this is about money? You walked into your dealership that day dressed like some nobody just to test us. Like we were bugs under your microscope." His voice cracked. "I was the best salesman you had." The detectives moved forward, but the woman held up a hand. "You're right." Silence. Even the rain seemed to pause. The assistant manager stared. "This wasn't part of the plan. I was testing people," the woman admitted. "Because in my father's garage, I learned one truth: the second you think you're better than your customers, you've failed." She stepped closer. "But you? You weren't fired for arrogance. You were fired because deep down, you still are that whistleblower, you just hate yourself for it." The salesman's hands shook. The flashlight clattered to the floor. As detectives led him away, the assistant manager finally spoke. "You could have crushed him." The woman watched taillights disappear in the rain. "Anyone can destroy. Real power? She turned, smiling for the first time all night. It's knowing when not to. Outside, the storm broke. Dawn light glinted off the showroom's luxury cars, not trophies, but testaments to a simple truth: in business and life, how you treat people matters most.